talk with you, Kirk. Do you go by Kirk or Kirkland or?
Kirk is fine.
Okay.
I decided that Kirkland, to begin with, just so, people didn't call me Kurt. But after
Right.
that, Kirk works. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I love Kirkland though. And I have to say, I just love how you are so symmetrical right now. It reminds me of with your background of a Wes Anderson kind of shot. It's really it's
Inspired.
awesome.
Yes.
Well, I'm such a fan of Filthy Beasts, and it's just such a thrill to be here with you. I got an early galley. I got an early bound copy, which is like one of my favorite things about being a bookstore, a buyer for our bookstore. And yours just like kind of snuck in. I'm like, what is this? And it just, it was so unique that um, I was like a little bit like, okay, is this story this or that? But it was like all of it. And then I just really felt like you were my best friend telling me everything and I couldn't put it down. So,
Thank you. Yes.
um,
I wanted the title to be memorable. So I figured a really beautiful cover with two cute looking boys called Filthy Beasts would be intriguing and would hope people would wonder what was going on there. So I guess that worked.
it does. Yeah, it works so well. I love the cover and I wanted to know. I wanted to know what was going on. Did you have any other titles you played around with
Oh,
or
there
that you
were
were
a couple of
thinking of?
others, but before I even wrote the book, I knew what the title was going to be because that was the pet name that my mother gave me and my two brothers, and I just loved the two words together. I love saying them. I love them separately. So it just there wasn't any real competition, and I even discussed it with our publishing company, Avid Reader, and they're like, no. Part of the reason we bought this book was because of the title. So
Perfect.
yeah, so that was a done deal from the get-go.
Well, it's a fantastic title. Would you want to read a tiny bit from
Sure.
your book just to give people,
Yeah,
if they
briefly,
haven't read it yet, an idea?
the prologue, which is just a couple of pages, and that'll give people a sort of a sense of the story.
Great.
When I tell people stories about my mother, as I tend to do, people sometimes ask me how long she's been gone. I think back to the spring day in 1982 when I asked her to drive me into town, and she got into the car with a full glass of scotch, wearing the sunglasses that she never took off, and she chewed her nails nervously as she tried to figure out how to start the engine. And I remember years later when I called her condo in Florida because I hadn't heard from her in a while. And she said, I call you every week. And I said, no, you don't. And she said, I leave a message at your dorm. And I said, I have a phone in my room. And she said, is your math class getting any better? And I said, I'm not in boarding school anymore. I went to college this year. And I remember the day, a year before she died, when I put down the phone after speaking with her, and that familiar tornado of sadness, a panic attack really, that always started as a pinprick in my gut and swirled like a funnel cloud before traveling up my stomach and into my throat, where it swallowed my words until I hacked it out in heaving sobs, lost its power, and I didn't cry for her anymore. And I remember it was a hot June day in Bermuda when my younger brother Monty and I flew in from opposite ends of the eastern seaboard to join our older brother Robin and our stepfather by her bedside to say goodbye. I leaned over her bed, the only one of the assembled capable of being face to face with her at the end, and asked, are you scared? As three nurses scurried around her, one to pull out the breathing tube, one to administer the morphine, and one to shut off the machines. And I remember that she looked up at me with her bright green eyes, the only part of her body that hadn't fallen apart, and shook her head dismissively, as if I had just asked if she wanted a cup of tea. And I remember the day, a few days after my mother stopped breathing, when my brothers and I were eating lunch with my stepfather, overlooking a private beach at Castle Harbor. The sun was warm, and the salty sea breeze was blowing up the corner of my white linen napkin in a way that made me think it was waving at me. In the distance, the white caps hit the top of the reefs, and broke apart so that the low waves came in lazily and lapped up gently onto the pink beach. And I closed my eyes and smiled. And for a moment, the anxiety and sadness of the past 25 years was gone. But then the tornado swirled up again, stronger this time. And I turned to Robin and told him that I didn't feel well and was going to the bathroom. But his eyes met mine and he blurted out, "What's wrong?" as the sides of his mouth dipped and he shifted in his seat. He looked like a little boy whose blanket had been snatched away. And Monty, who had been laughing the second before, stopped and looked at me, and then at Robin, and became quiet. So I swallowed hard, looked at my brothers reassuringly, and settled back into my seat, knowing that it wasn't my turn to cry yet. "I'm okay, just a little hot. Nothing's wrong," I said.
Thanks so much. Oh my gosh, it just your writing is so poetic.
Coming from a poet, that's a very nice thing to hear. Thank you.
It really is. Yeah, I was blown away by your writing. I'm so curious. Have you written your whole life, or?
I mean, the same way that everybody else does. I kind of knew it was almost like a hobby. I mean, most of the writing that I did, I wrote a lot of letters when people still wrote letters when I was younger. And I had pen pals all over the place. I mean, friends of mine that I exchanged letters with. And I knew something was different when my letters would be 5 or 6 pages long and I'd get back like a 1-page, I went to the beach, I went to the whatever. And then email came along and the same thing happened. I'd write these very long sort of descriptive things about something and people would write back, "Oh, great to hear from you." And so clearly I was compelled, but I never thought about doing it as it just seemed too hard, it just seemed too impossible. So the way I started was with these little stories that a lot of them are peppered through the book, the funny stories, darkly funny, obviously. But I started writing these before work every day. 2 hours I would give myself. I say before work, it was actually during work part of the time. And I thought, okay, I've been telling these stories forever. I want to write them down and I'm going to give myself 2 hours to do it. And I did one every day for 2 weeks or so or longer. And then started posting them on a blog and they started to get some attention. And I thought, okay, well, I should write a book. Obviously, I mean, you get a little bit of feedback that says this is good or it's funny or whatever, and we want to know more. And you're like, okay, well, I should write a book. And of course, I had no idea how to do that. And yada, yada, yada. 10 years later, here we are.
So is it, yeah, about 10 years ago that you kind of.
Yeah, longer. I mean, 12 years ago. I keep saying 10, but the years keep going by. So it's about 12 now. Yeah, it just, it took a long time, and I'm sure I went about it the really long way, but it's the way I knew how to do it. And yeah, so, and I was compelled. I told these stories for so long. And, when you're in this experience, which, with an alcoholic mother and just all these things that are happening, and I was alone at the time, I hadn't met Dave yet. Part of it was just I needed to tell the story for witnesses. Like I wanted people to know what was going on, and through it, I think I really figured out, made sense of a lot of stuff that is really, really hard to make sense of.
Right. Yeah. And your mom had passed away when you started writing already?
Yep, she died in 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that which made it easier. Obviously, I mean, a lot of people ask about memoirs and how it impacts the people you're writing about. And both my parents were dead by the time it got published, and by the time I really worked at trying to get it published. So almost all of the characters, actually, the real people, are no longer with us. So logistically, that just made it less difficult. But I think I would have done it anyway.
How about your brothers?
Yeah, they,
They're
I've told the story before of, I uh, um, obviously gave them a copy before it even got to the galley phase. And, I said, I'm open to hearing what you think. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to change anything. But if you think anything is inaccurate or just, something that you really aren't comfortable with, then let me know. And they both finished it in 2 days. And, we're spending a week together, and they came down and they looked at me and they just sort of had this shell shocked expression.
wow.
And I still haven't quite figured out what that was. They both were very supportive. They said, this is amazing. We think it's great. We're so proud of you, all of those things that you want to hear. And yet, I almost feel like because we've been telling these stories for so long, part of it was that not a lot of it was new. We didn't have disagreements about what had happened because we had shared the stories with each other and with other people for so long. There were a couple of little things where, my younger brother was like, well, I didn't see it this way. And he had a strong enough point where I was, talking more about him, where I said, yeah, I'm happy to change that to what you think is more accurate. But generally they're like, good for you. And I think there's a part of them that just is kind of excited about the story getting out as well. Alcoholism is such an isolating experience. And when you're living through it, you think you're the only people that are going through anything that just insane. And, obviously it turns out that's not the case. A lot of people are going through it. So I think I think there was something about it too, that just having other people, um, letting them in to what actually happened was, maybe as healing in some ways for them as it was for me.
Yeah, I did get the sense that it must have been such a healing process telling this story and maybe getting it right, because I felt like you really got it right. Like you nailed it, like and then to be able, I don't know, was there like a release after that, or like a
Uh,
sigh or
it's a slow release. I mean, there have been lots of, it's like a very, a balloon where it's just released little by little over a long period of time. I think creating the narrative was really important, for me, because I had to, obviously with a memoir, you have to dig pretty deeply to kind of go, okay, well, when I was in my 20s, what was I really feeling and what was I really thinking and what was happening to me? And being able to go from the beginning to the end, um, obviously not the end of my life, but the end of, when my mother died, which is the end of the book, the beginning and the end of the book, um, just helped me create meaning from it. And I think that's one of the things that's so difficult for people who go through dysfunctional things where everything is so elevated and, um, insane to the point where you can't really it doesn't make any sense, that having some mechanism by which I could go through it and not necessarily make sense of everything that happened, but make sense of what happened to me and how I navigated it and how I got through it, and how I'm now, I can sort of think of it as being in the past now. It's always a part of me, obviously, but I'm not pulled by those, painful things anymore. Those have largely been healed. And I think writing the book was a big part of that.
well, it's such a brave and honest and transparent book. I felt really like let into all of those emotions. And I don't, was that hard? Like, was it hard did you ever wonder, like, can I write this? Like, can I share this, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've talked about, one of the things that happens with alcoholism is shame. And, because of alcoholics are by nature secretive, they don't want, their illness. They're unfamiliar with their own illness. I mean, they're in denial. Most bad alcoholics are in denial about what's actually happening to them. I just decided once I got a taste of the freedom of telling the truth about something and exposing, and that doesn't necessarily mean exposing to, just people on the street, but going to Al-Anon and just releasing all of these things that for so long had been these things that you're not supposed to talk about and that are taboo. And as soon as I got a sense of the power of that, I wanted more. And so I through kind of shedding all of these things that had been sort of holding me back spiritually and in every, just in my health, getting a sense of how shedding that was opening me up and making me feel better. I wanted more. So I think that was one part of it. The other was just, I think a lot of writers, people ask me, and I'm sure they've asked you, how on earth do you write a whole book? I mean, I've tried to do it and I spend half an hour and I turn on the TV and I can't do it. It's a compulsion. I wanted this story out. I wanted it out of me and out. And so I think that was another part of it. I decided at some point that I was just not going to hold on to shame. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about, the sexuality and the sort of evolution of that and all of the, embarrassing things that happened to teenage boys around that time, I thought, okay, well, this is a very human thing that happens to every teenager. And
those were my favorite parts.
Well, most people don't talk about it, right? But it happens to almost everybody. So it just kind of knowing that, I thought, well, there's nobody who's going to be looking at it, rolling their eyes going, oh, well, that's never happened to me. It's happened to you. It's happened to everybody you know. And maybe not with Winnie the Pooh, but with some Winnie the Pooh type figure. And,
I love that so much. I just felt like, oh my gosh, I loved you, I was like, wonderful. It's so freeing. It's for just to read it and you're like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Not that I did that exact thing, but plenty of many things.
I mean, you hope that you do it and somebody doesn't walk in the door, but it makes a much better story if they do. So
great stories all through.
I mean, that haunted me for years. You can imagine, being 13 or 14, whatever I was. And all my brothers had to say was Winnie the Pooh or A.A. Milner, whatever. It didn't matter, point to a picture and it was just like, and then I was like, okay, well, fuck it. It happened. I'm going to own it and not worry about it anymore. And made life a lot easier.
There's so much power in that, I think. And then it's just, people want to read your book too, it's so great. And I felt like really all the characters were so complex, that they were real people. I had that feeling. I hope nobody can hear my dog scratching on the door. It's okay. Okay, I'm gonna leave her out. I wondered if that was hard, like if you were ever tempted to simplify, even like your mother was such an incredible portrayal of her, that she's so loving, but she's also hard. But you got it all in there. And was that like difficult? Were you ever tempted to simplify her for the sake, say, of the story?
Well, I don't like books that are that simple. I don't believe in heroes and villains. I think we're all a little, hopefully we err on the side of being more generous and giving and all that stuff. But, all the characters are very human, including me. And I wouldn't be interested in writing that book. I was much more fascinated with that all of these things can coincide and happen at the same time and have a larger meaning, or just that all of us are complex, and given certain circumstances, brings out our best or our worst. And I was really interested in the humanity of everybody, my mother, my father, me, my brothers, all of us. And I just think that makes a more interesting story. And especially with a person who's as larger than life, like my mother, because on the surface, she's this very entertaining, body, Betty Davis, terrifying person. And as we all know, people like that are usually very insecure and frightened and all of these other things at the same time. And, people don't die at 61 of alcoholism if they're just sort of strong and resilient and all of that. And I got really interested in the idea of what strength was. If people tell me that I'm strong, and people have, which I appreciate, and it's nice to hear, but a lot of that strength is the vulnerability, and a lot of that strength is letting in the pain and expressing it and doing all of those things. And my mother had this idea that to be strong meant that you never showed anything and you overcame things, but she grew smaller and smaller and smaller as that happened. And it was a very important lesson for me. I just, as a witness to it, I could see what it was doing to her and what it was doing to her relationships with people and how it was fueling her alcoholism. And I just thought, okay, I want a different type of strength. I want a much more pliable, much more human piece. And so that, for everybody in the book, I hope people, one of my first reviews, you'll appreciate this, was a Goodreads review from somebody who's like, oh my God, these characters are so awful. I can't believe you got a book deal. They just, there's no redeeming thing. And I was, it's like one of the first, and it's my first book. And I'm like, oh my God, everybody's gonna read this book. They are, we all are unlikable at lots of points in the book. But, you hope that, it's also kind of funny. And that's the thing.
Exactly.
Other part that was so important to me was the humor, because with something so painful, the great lubricator of just being able to get past anything was finding the dark humor in it. And I know some people are going to read it and perhaps consider it insensitive or, but one of the reasons originally that I wrote the funny stories, and I thought, maybe I'd put together like a little David Sedaris type thing where everything's kind of funny and there's always something funny to it. And I just realized that that's not accurate. And through parts of the book, I tried to make parts funny because I thought, okay, nobody wants to read this, a bummer thing. And I just eventually surrendered. I was like, that wasn't funny and that really hurt and that was difficult. And I'm going to write it exactly how it happened. And it goes up and down, hopefully organically that way, because there were a lot of things that were just awful that were hysterical at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I think I was reading your book out at a restaurant or something, and I was like laughing out loud, and then I started crying, in the next page, and that's life, and it's so, human, and those are my favorite books, and yours did all of it.
Well, because it is life. And if you decide you're going to just be serious about everything, your life's not going to be that joyful. And if you decide you're just going to, make fun of everything, your life is not going to be that meaningful. And I wanted both. I want the joy, I want the meaning. I don't want to be clueless about what's actually happening. I want to, see it and own it and process it. And, sometimes it takes years before something's funny. And for a lot of those things, that certainly was the case. But wait long enough.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you feel like your feelings about your mother through writing it did shift in a way?
I think through the whole process, my compassion for my mother is the primary feeling that I have now. Obviously, there was anger, there was sadness, there was immense loss, frustration, all of those things. my overwhelming, I'd say 95% feeling now is just immense compassion. I mean, nobody with everything that she had going for her wants to die pretty much alone at 61 years old of, alcohol, of organ failure because you've been drinking yourself to death for 25 years. So I understand that now, and through the process of writing it, I that was an important part of it for me, was to get to that point. And I don't think I could have really finished it if I hadn't gotten to that point. I mean, a lot of people, I think, write memoirs or write these things, and you can read in it whether there's still healing to be done. You can read, you can feel, even if the words don't say it specifically, you can feel the anger, you can feel it just sort of is pouring out through the words, even if it's not specific. And first of all, that's not a very good book, in my opinion. And it's also why I think I took my time. I sold this book on with a proposal, but I had finished the book, and 10 years ago, 12 years ago, or whatever, I had the proposal done, and I tried a couple of times, and I then stopped because I thought, okay, what if somebody decides they want it, and then I have to finish it within a year? I don't know if I'm going to be ready to do it. I don't know if it's going to be, and I had one shot to tell this story. It's my life. I'm not going to write another book about, the first 45 years of my life or 38 years of my life. So I have to do it right. So I finished it, and then I tried to sell it when it was ready to be done.
Seems smart. I mean, I haven't sold a book on a proposal, but I've wondered about that. Or if you had one in the work, if you had to rush it, how that would feel. Because I am one of those writers too that I take my time, because I feel like it's worth putting out something you feel good about every single word, and
because nothing else is guaranteed, right? So
right.
The only thing that's guaranteed at the end of it is, did I create the best product that I can? And then you give it up and go, okay, people are either going to read it or they're not. It's going to be there forever. Maybe they'll get 20 years and they'll read it, who knows? But I'm like you. I want it to be the best thing that I know how to do. And, then it's out of my control. But I feel good about it.
Good. Yeah, I hope you do, because it's really beautiful. I'm curious, are you thinking of writing anything else right now? And is anything in the works? Or?
Yeah, I've got I'm almost done with the first draft of a novel. That is, I wrote the memoir, and I thought, okay, originally I'd like Augustin Burroughs or somebody, I could keep writing memoirs. And I was like, I left it all on the field with the first one. And I don't know that I could, I had so much content, like really good stuff, which is just, fortunate, maybe not fortunate for my life, but fortunate for the book. And I thought, okay, well, I want to try something new. So I did take an event that happened in my life and I fictionalized it, which I decided not to do with the first book. But
yeah, I was going to ask that too. Like, was there a moment where you thought, well, maybe fiction would be the way to go with this, or something?
You know what's so weird about that? I think if that had been fictionalized, a lot of people it would have read as unbelievable.
I mean, know. I agree.
What happens is, it just, unless that it's real and this is, a real person telling a real story, you would think, it's a little far-fetched. You could have dialed it back a little bit. So no, I never thought about that with the first book. But yeah, I got really excited. One of the downsides of writing a memoir is that if you do it well and ethically, you're telling the truth. And so, there are lots of times where I'm like, okay, well, I'm in Seattle. How do I get us out of Seattle and back to my mother? Because I know that's where the energy is. And, you know, the editors that I worked with just kept saying, you know, we need to know about you. We need to know about your journey. People are going to experience this book through you. And I was like, oh, okay, well, all right, then let's do that. But so I thought with a novel, I can, you know, if I don't want to spend any time in Seattle, I can write what I want. And, you know, as you know, that also is you're restricted with a memoir, which also gives you some parameters. And with a novel, you can go anywhere you want. So then again, that's a whole other challenge, but
Right.
I've really enjoyed it. And like, you know, it's one of those things where I've written it, I haven't shown it to anybody, and it's not to the point where it should be in a month or so. And, you know, I'm just holding my breath, hoping that I didn't waste 2 or 3 years doing something that just isn't going to work.
Isn't
That's
that
the deal.
crazy? I
It's
know, it's so
insane.
much time alone with something that
And
you're
then you show it
making.
to somebody, they're like, that's like 3 years of my life. I mean, that's a real possibility. And, you
Yeah.
know, you just have to be sort of a marathon runner by
Mhm.
just temperament to manage that. And like we talked about, you have to, I'm happy. I think it's good. You know, I read it and I think, oh, that sounds pretty good. And that's funny. And if that's all I'm left with at the end of it, then, you know, we'll
Do you
call it
share
a copy. Yeah.
it? Then that's good, right?
Yeah.
I'm
That's
just
my home.
curious, do you share it with Dave? Like as you're writing it at all or not?
No, no. I don't know that I'm the type of writer that Dave, he's more of a James Patterson type
Okay.
type reader. I also, I mean, he doesn't have a very good poker face. So I did show him like one sort of thing and he's like, why is that scene there? I mean, I got really confused. Like, what are they doing there? It's like, all right, yeah, okay. And so I haven't done it yet. I haven't done
Maybe not, right? Do you read passages to Blue or no?
No, it's all in my head. And that's could be a very dangerous spot. So it's going to have to come out to somebody soon, but it also has to make sense because as you also know, if people get to a spot and right now it's jumping around and there are plot holes that need to be filled and you're going to lose them. And then their feedback really isn't helpful at that point because they're like, you know, you lost me. I don't know where you're going. So the rest of it kind of gets tainted and I need it to be in a full enough form where, you know, even if it's not as lyrical and wonderful as I want it to be, at least people understand what happens from the beginning to the end and why, and it makes sense and is believable.
Yeah, I do think there is something so kind of precious. I don't know. I've had 2 kids, so it's sort of like, you know, gestation.
Yeah.
And if you let it out too soon, it feels like to me like you can lose something, some of that magic or the, you know, in the bubbling cauldron or what.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
it's you know, I took writing classes, online writing classes where there are like 15 of us. And if you've ever taken those, 15 people read your passages and then 15 people comment on it. And I just found that unhelpful at some point because some people are like, oh my God, this is so great. You've got to include this. And other people were like, I don't like that passage. And you're like, what do I do? And so I've just decided to trust my own instincts about it. And then to the point where then I really do surrender it to other people and I pay close attention to what they're telling me. Because I'm, you know, if anybody who reads my book knows I grew a pretty thick skin and it's a really important thing if you want to publish a good book because people will tell you what is working and what isn't. And if you decide you're going to get defensive or precious about the whole thing, then you're going to end up with not as good a book as you can. So, you know, avid reader, my editor, Ben Lunan, you know, he was slash and burn with all sorts of things. And I was like, yeah, he's right about that. And that went on a little bit too long. And, you know, it's exactly what you need.
Did you have to lose any, just like this precious kind of thing you loved, like kill
Well, that
any of
was the
those
other thing that was
children?
great. He's like, you know, if you really feel strongly about it, then fight for it. because and he was also wise enough to say, you're going to have a sense of this. He's just cutting and burning, and pretty, I wouldn't say indiscriminately. He's doing it, for a reason. But he's like, if there are parts of it that you really think are important to stay in there, then fight for it, and I'll defer to you. And I'd say they're like 10 or 11 things, and they were pretty small. And but so I kept those. And then there was my father had a girlfriend who I mentioned, Samantha, I think I call her in the book. And she was batshit crazy in ways that, I'd never experienced before. And there was a whole section with her. And I hired an editor ahead of time. She's like, this is juicy, crazy stuff, but it takes us away from the main story. And so a lot of that hit the cutting room floor, but, she could have had a whole, but her, I make the joke in the book that, my father had a, what did I say? A comic drinking problem, and she had a terrible drinking problem. I don't remember what it was, but yeah,
I remember some,
yeah, sort of the dark comedy of and her. She was just a black hole of misery, and probably didn't make it into the book.
Maybe she could be a separate novel. Some part.
Yeah. I still have all of that, but
that's great. I know. Yeah. What do you do with those bits?
You let them go.
Right. It's better without them. Right.
And I really do. I mean, that's one of the things that I've learned is, even when you're writing a memoir, that sort of narrative structure has to be as tight as possible. And I took inspiration from novels more than I did memoir.
I wanted to ask you.
Because I love novels, probably more than I love memoirs. And so I want to turn the page when the chapter's done, like, okay, I want to know what happens next. And so I thought about that with every chapter, like what's going to be sort of moving people along to want to turn the page and see what happens next. And so that part of it was something that I had to learn how to do, and I needed help with. But I was driven by what I like to read and what moves me to, keep going through something. I abandon books all the time. If I'm 20 pages in and I'm not sold, I drop it. It's like watching Netflix. Yeah. You got 20 minutes to capture me, and if you don't,
and yours was a turner. And you did that at the end of the chapter. I was like, oh man, I can't stop. I gotta read the next one, or start it at least.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I'm curious. What are some of your favorite novels, or what maybe were you reading anything when you wrote this that inspired you?
Well, I was inspired by David Sedaris. I mentioned him earlier. Friends of mine had a drinking game when I'd come on these things, and every time I said David Sedaris, they would take a shot. Which is a little dark humor when you're reading a book about alcoholism, I suppose. I loved, there's my dog. Loved David. I loved Augustin Burroughs. So those were sort of my inspirations, mixing the comedy with the meaning and the, difficulty. But the book, my nephew just asked me to recommend books, and I sent him like 5 or 6 of them. He was like, did any of these sort of inspire your book? And I was like, come to think of it, all of them. So The Secret History by Donna Tartt, I loved. I just sort of loved that dark, deep, getting deep into the darkness with, people's characters. A Separate Piece. I remember I read that book 2 or 3 times. The Book Thief, I loved. And all of them have kind of I loved Pat Conroy when I was younger, just that sort of melodramatic kind of Southern Gothic thing. And Mark Halperin, Soldier of the Great War, just kind of those big epic stories. So yeah, I've got a lot of them are books that I've read a long time ago. East of Eden, I think, is probably my favorite book of all time. Just really rich, fun characters with a compelling plot, it will get me every time.
Yeah.
So,
Cool. Yeah.
and I'm sure Leonora in the Morning Light, which I haven't started yet, Michaela's new book coming out April 6th, is going to be one of those as well.
Yay. I'm so excited for you to read it. Well, you have to let me know what you think.
Will do.
Hopefully it won't be one you put down.
I'm almost, one of the things, when I've gone to bookstores, I've said, are there any poets who have written novels? Because those are the books that I want to read. There's nothing better than somebody who just has this magic with words and can put it into a compelling plot. Those are the people that I love more than anything. So I've no doubt I'm going to love it.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I love those. And yours had that for me. I read, especially when you can reread sentences, and that I was just like, oh my gosh, kept reading bits out to my husband. So I'm very grateful for your book. And I wanted to ask too, I don't know how long we have before questions or, but
I think Rohini is
I could answer
asking
audience questions. Okay. Let's see the Q&A. All right. Okay. Here's one question. In my own life, as well as in the lives of other men I have done group work with, the impact of enmeshment with our moms has greatly impacted our adult romantic relationships, particularly related to difficulty with emotional intimacy. Has this been your experience? Could you share how healing has happened for you?
It's a great question.
Good one.
I could have written 2 or 3 chapters just on my dating life before I met Dave, because I picked really bad. Well, that's not fair. I picked men who didn't like me, and it's sort of a no-brainer now, kind of reading the book. But people have pointed out to me, you were working really hard to get your mother's attention and your mother's love, and as that started to drift away because of her illness, and so it kind of makes psychology 101 sense thinking about it. Like, I just sort of chose men that were unavailable because I needed to, compel them to love me, and that would have healed something. But obviously it doesn't. So with Dave, it was really interesting. I remember before I started dating him, I thought, okay, I just need to act against my instincts. And I've done a lot of that. I mean, just sort of reprogramming and listening to my friends who love me and are very close and say, this guy really likes you and he really gets you in a way. And your compulsion to kind of want to move on from that, or the discomfort of it, you need to just hang in there, because this person's good for you. And I really need to consciously make a choice to do that. So when I just am not outfitted with that thing where people magically come together and it's the stars light up and whatever. That's never been my experience, probably because, I've needed to really reframe everything for myself in order to live a healthy, happy life. And, I picked a good one.
That's great. How long have you been together? I just want to ask.
10 years, 10 and a half years. Yeah. So,
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got 3 grown children. His youngest was 18 when he and I met. So it's perfect. I've got niece and nephews and I love them. But his kids were grown and gone. And so we get to enjoy them and enjoy my niece and nephews without all the responsibility of raising children. And so it's been great.
It's wonderful. Okay, one more question here. I'm enjoying this. This is Diane. She says, I'm enjoying this conversation immensely and will search out your book. How old were you when your mother passed away?
I was 30, put this 38. I think that's right. Yeah. Born in 68, 78, 88, 98. Yep, she died in 2005. So 38. Yeah, and she had been, she started getting pretty bad when I was a teenager. So it was a long, long haul with her. And she was just physically really in bad shape for a long time. So
Yeah, it seemed like such just a hard thing. And I love what you read with the prologue, how disoriented she was with, it just gave you such a clear idea of, where she was. Like, I'm not in that school anymore, and you did that so well in just a couple pages.
just out to, she was gone. I mean, she was still there. That's the other thing, for people who've been, a lot of the mourning for her happened while she was still alive. I mean, when she actually died, I'd say there's maybe 10% of it left, because she had died a long time before that. She was just sort of a shell of a person. And I think she had some sense of that. I think part of the reason that she separated herself more and more was, I think there's probably a part of her that knew how toxic she was, and an instinct not to inflict that on other people, because that's one of the, there are a lot of alcoholics out there who are very abusive and or going after people in their lives. My mother wasn't like that. She was much more, she would react poorly, and she, you've read the wedding stories, she wasn't reliable. She was terrifying. And she could say some truly awful things, but it wasn't, sort of a campaign. It was like these one-offs that just, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe she just said that.
It makes for a wonderful book.
I had to be reminded of what my mother said at my older brother's wedding, because it's one of those things that's so shocking. You wonder how anybody else goes on with the night. But hopefully it'll be made into a movie one day, because I'd love to see that scene on film.
I would love to see that scene on film also. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, when it was gearing up, I was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean,
what's she gonna do?
80 people in a room and 40 of them hate each other, it's just gonna be fireworks and
good stuff for a book or for a film. Yeah. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? I wonder. Oh, here's one.
Trainer.
And there's one too. Okay, we have a couple. You mentioned your spirituality briefly earlier. Could you talk more about what it means to you and how it has evolved?
Yeah, so this was a really important part, and it's not religious. I'm not religious. But when I first started going to Al-Anon at 19, one of the things that is almost, I don't know if it's impossible, but really, really hard to do, because they tell you you need to detach from these people that you love. You can't help them. And you need to take care of yourself, and you have to let go of what's going to happen to them. You can't save them. Mm-hmm. And that's a really difficult thing to hear when you love somebody. And the only way that I knew how to do that, which is what Al-Anon teaches, is you surrender it to a higher power. Just some, this is not this is my mother's journey, and she's gonna, I can't fix anything for her. And so my spirituality was really sort of born out of that idea, like, okay, in order for me to be okay, I'm going to need to let her go and let that go wherever it's going to go. And it doesn't take away the sadness. It doesn't take away the anger. It doesn't take away any of the emotions. associated with it. But what it does do is it stops you reacting to things that are just making you sicker and making things more difficult. So I really held on to that idea for a long time. And the freedom of it was incredibly important. Just this freedom from guilt, this freedom from responsibility, not because I was abandoning something, but because I could not do anything. And Al-Anon was, I would go back to these meetings and they'd say, give it a shot. Try your best. Do whatever you think is going to work. I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. But if you need to go through that to just prove to yourself that it's not going to work, have at it. I did a little bit of that and I was like, okay, I get it now. So that's really where my spirituality is just that idea of letting go and believing in something that I don't fully understand. This, for whatever reason, was my mother's journey, and she gets to choose her own journey. Or, if she never, we tried an intervention, we did try to help, and she chose not to accept it. And, at some point, it's not my job to tell her how to live anyway. And having that sort of, that there's a higher purpose behind it that I don't understand was really helpful for me.
Okay, so this is Tony, your trainer.
Hi, Tony.
Okay. Do you feel that being a son who loves his mother is an obligation, a duty, a compulsion, or something else? Do you feel you had to actively nurture the best emotional connection possible, or were you driven to do so despite sometimes feeling pushed apart?
Yeah, I think, I sort of touched on that with the last answer. Obviously, the default, or at least the default for me, was this incredibly close connection. And, she and I were, not just because she was my mother, but because we got each other. And so losing that was very, very painful and very, very difficult. But like I said before, at some point, when there is nothing less left to connect to, nothing meaningful, nothing real. Our conversations were very, we'd talk about the weather. As I said in the book, it was a constant thing. How's your weather? And I'd answer how my weather was. And we didn't get into anything too deeper than that, because she just didn't have the capacity for it. And the barbs could come out. And, I got very good at, if things were going down a pathway and I could start to feel myself, having that the anxiety or the anger or whatever, I was like, okay, I got to go. And I'd hang up the phone and remove myself from the situation. And I got very good at protecting myself from that and being okay with, I didn't have a sense of obligation that as her son, I had to go down with the ship. It didn't make sense to me that her ship was going to go down. It didn't make sense that two people would have to go down if one person could be okay. So in some ways it was a simple, at some points, just a simple math problem. Like I can't save her, but I can save myself. That's all I can do.
Such a good lesson for all of us. I feel like all of us have someone.
And it happens, it keeps recurring throughout your whole life. There are some things, relationships that just aren't working, and there's a lot of power in letting some of those things go, and they may come back. That's the other thing. Letting go doesn't mean, I'm all done, never going to talk to you again. It could just mean letting go. And, maybe naturally it will come back around again. And having that perspective on it was also very helpful. Nothing's forever. And, it was still possible that my mother could have gotten help at some point, but I didn't have anything to do with it.
Okay, here's one more question. I think we have time for it. Okay. You mentioned that you had to uncover some of the stories in your memoir, such as your brother's wedding. And I wonder if you had blocked out some of the more upsetting experiences you went through and only found once you started writing.
That is a unique example. I mean, I remember that wedding so well. It was that one scene where my mother stood up, it was actually at the rehearsal dinner, and said something that I had forgotten about. I'm sure a lot of the scenes, there are, I don't know, 80% of the things that happened I probably forgot, and they probably didn't make it into the book, but everything was, how I remembered it, which is all you can do with a memoir. I didn't, write a biography. I wasn't doing research. But yeah, so I didn't, I wasn't, I didn't go to everybody and say, how did you remember this? I really was telling my story, my version of it. And it just happened to come up in conversation with my older brother, like, remember when she stood up and said this? And I'm like, oh my God. And then I was like, oh yes, how could I have forgotten that? And then I remember the person standing up afterwards and what they said, just the discomfort in the room. I was like, oh, how did I forget that? And I'm sure there's a lot of that that didn't get, jogged with my memory, that just didn't make it into the book.
Well, oh my gosh, this has just been so much fun talking with you, and
Thank you.
everyone's enjoyed it so much, I can tell.
Loved it. Leonora in the Morning, coming out April 6th. Don't miss it.
And get your copy of Flthy Beasts. You won't be sorry. Ever.
Thank you so much for being here today. This conversation was so wonderful. It was warm, humorous, and full of compassion. And I enjoyed it so much. And I'm sure everybody did too. And I'm really glad that you were here with us today. I will be sending out in a follow-up email. I will be sending out the names of the books and authors that Kirk mentioned, because I'm sure you would want to, remember those and maybe have a look at them. I will also be sending out a link to Michaela's book and to Kirk's book, so that you can kind of, have a look at those. And I'll also be sending out a survey, which is really important for us because we love hearing from you. And so thank you so much. Have a wonderful
Thank you, Rohini.
Thank you, Rohini. Thanks so much for having.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.